Walt, we had a great week in Austin, riding around in robotaxis, but we weren't just there to ride around in robotaxis. We're there to learn about the autonomy economy. We met with several companies, and we've got a really great episode for our listeners coming today. Thanks for the great feedback. Yes, we are going to show more video footage of our Austin trip, and that's coming today. But Walt, we got to pat ourselves on the back. We made another right prediction. We predicted last week that Waymo was going to expand their operational design domain, commonly known for your listeners, the service area. Waymo has gone from 37 square miles to 90 square miles. It's getting bigger in Austin. Things are moving.
That was a big expansion in an already large ODD, which is this geographic service area. And as we mentioned last week, we just saw tons of Waymos. And it really just wasn't a surprise based on the number of Waymos we saw. And I think what you're about to see in this next video, the Avomo Service Center. And Avomo, as a reminder, is partly owned by Uber. It used to be called Move. They actually, partly own two different moves. In this case, it's now called Avomo. But let's roll the tape for our discovery of the Avomo Uber Waymo Service Center. And there it is. All we had to do was search.
We got you, Avomo, we got you.
Daddy's home.
Walt, the sleuth work worked.
Daddy is home. I mean, they're not really hiding it when they have the words Avomo on there. Did we potentially...
Do you think Avomo stands for fear of missing out?
A FOMO. As you can see, we made it to the Avomo depot where the Waymo cars and Uber cars are getting charged.
Yep.
There are how many chargers here?
18.
18 chargers. They seem to drive themselves in. There's a guy driving a car. He's probably doing a service. We're going to walk on the other side of the building. This is a lot like what I saw in, I think it was LA, where you had charging in one location with these massive superchargers and then servicing for recalibrations on the other side.
Basically, we noticed that the vehicles are coming in, charging on their own, and then connected with what appears to be Waymo's version of a supercharger. So
well, they're not charging on their own. There's a human plugging them in.
Yes, but they're backing into the spot fully autonomously.
Parking into the spot, and then obviously you've got a couple technicians there. And you can see that the trunks are open, so there's probably some level of cleaning that's being done as well.
Always a good laugh. We got you indeed. We counted 36 charging ports and dozens of vehicles at the depot. It was a very, very active depot.
It was very active. We were just tons of those Waymos coming in and out, aside from the ones that we saw on the street. But on this next clip, we went to the other side of that massive complex where we checked out what they were doing on the service and calibration side. And this is similar to an experience that I had in LA when I was able to find that service center in terms of what they were doing. I want to just caution the listeners. You might have seen this last week. I apologize for the sweats. It was 107 degrees. And in this case, I think we just came back from a delicious lunch at Terry Black. So we might have had some meat sweats going on during this video clip. But let's play our next video. So what you're looking at here is the back of this massive Avomo complex, which, they have service. They're charging the cars up there. If you look at these ramps, that's clearly where I think the cars are going in, getting sensors fixed, maybe some calibrations. We've talked about having service depots like this scattered around the cities and real estate being important, but given the size of this could, how many cars could this handle? This could probably handle all of Austin.
You're probably looking at 1,000 to 1,500 cars handle the size of this facility. You're maybe 50 to 100,000 square feet, a massive, massive facility.
Although they need more charging, because again, they only had 18 chargers. So they probably had to add, and there's space to add more charging facilities here. So they'd probably add more charging here and then maybe just add more charging throughout the city.
If they wanted to, they could probably add 300 chargers on this facility, just on the parking lot, the property that they currently have.
And Austin might be different than LA in that Austin, you can get large chunks of land like this that aren't really that far from the ODD, where LA, maybe it needs to be more scattered. So it could be like a market by market situation.
And let's not forget, Walt, 2.1 miles that way, Austin Bergam Airport. So perfect facility when they eventually expand airports.
That's definitely true. Close to the airports where a lot of the rides are going to come from. So I would think that they'd have to add more chargers. There doesn't seem like there's any construction to add more superchargers on the other side. it really looks, I mean, it's a lot of space. Are they possibly charging inside? We don't see activity going in and out of there, but I guess it's always possible that they could go into the building and charge in there.
The question is, what's going in on site? That's the million-dollar question. Avomo, you're on the Road to Autonomy newsletter. Perhaps write to Walt and I and let us know what's going on site and welcome us in for a sneak peek.
So just a couple footnotes on that video as we continue to do some additional research and investigation. I don't believe that there was any charging going on inside that large facility, which is probably more in the range of 70 or 80,000 square feet. All the charging was outdoors. They had 18 different actual chargers split into two, so 36 cars total could charge at a time. So inside that facility is clearly where they were getting serviced. And I'm suspecting that it's going to be similar to what I saw in LA in terms of, different problems identified with different tags. And you had a lot of engineers in there. We heard a lot of noises going on. We suspected there might be some calibration. Our knowledge, and we were sitting there waiting, but our knowledge of calibration was more of like a car sitting there while you had a bunch of QR codes around it and the sensors calibrated to that. But I'm not sure that that's the case here.
But that's not what we saw there. What we saw was not, and I want to put this into perspective for the listeners and viewers. The depot was the size of a Costco. It was massive. It was truly the size of a Costco. What we saw and what we noticed when the vehicles would come out down the ramp, they would drive around the building in anywhere from, I would say, 5 to 10 miles an hour. Perhaps that's calibrating it. We don't know, but let's roll the clip and you come to your own opinion. As you can see from the video, it is Costco-sized. It is a very big facility. As Walt said, probably around 80,000 square feet or so. It's built to scale. But now that we have the announcement the ODD has expanded to 90 square miles, well, I'm beginning to think there's traffic in Austin. Are they going to have to put, a micro depot in the north part of the ODD or charging throughout there to ensure that the service can continue to work as they add more vehicles to the fleet?
I mean, I think we alone have addressed this over many, many of our podcasts in terms of the importance of, the service and the charging of these vehicles and the locations of that. So even in Austin, where a large depot like this will help this expansion and probably even add more than what we think are 200 cars that are on the roads. And I think our numbers are pretty good there. If you really want to get up to 500, 700, 1,000, you're going to need to add additional locations, and it becomes a real estate play. And then the challenge of the real estate play, as many of us know, is the challenge of getting power to those locations, which makes me wonder when you think about Waymo as, being doing some of these rides in New York or some of these cities, and how our grid works in New York, but more importantly, real estate locations. How is that going to work, Grayson?
I don't know. Right now, we have a lot of public photos, and Waymo has admitted this and verified it, that they are currently storing the vehicles in Jersey City. Well, I grew up in the tri-state area. You live there. There's a lot of traffic, and that's a long distance to go. So does Waymo have to sublease real estate somewhere? And if they do, how are they going to get all the energy that's going to be required to charge these vehicles? That's a question that I have.
Well, I don't know. It could be like the sleuth work we need to do now would be like the sleuth work of, tracking where Comcast is buying land for its next Universal Studios, because, you're going to require, again, real estate and where they're applying for power, which in many cases can be a multi-year process. It's obviously going to be easier to make it more segmented. And to your point, getting something large in Jersey, Long Island, Westchester, Connecticut, whatever, you still have the challenge of like, okay, now all the cars are up there getting serviced or charged. How do you move them from there, given the traffic that exists in this area, into the city where they're needed at the most, in the scale that's going to be required? So I'm sure Uber is like licking their chops as they listen to this segment and saying, yes, that's what we're talking about all along, because their supply is obviously distributed in driveways throughout the tri-state area. This is clearly a real issue, and one that we, carefully consider when we see these mega 80,000 foot depots that Waymo is running.
The only place that I can realistically see is you put out in Queens, you put out in Long Island City, but then there's a political climate that's changing in New York. The VMT, the vehicles mile travel debate, is going to come up. So at some point, I know I'm beating a dead bush here, but they're going to have to put micro depots inside of Manhattan in order for this to truly scale.
Well, you don't beat a dead bush, you beat a dead horse, I think. Grayson. But yeah, I agree. And it speaks to how quickly Waymo can, and Uber or whoever, if they even partner with Uber in New York, how quickly they can really get that market. It's obviously a super important market. So putting up 5 cars or 10 cars to get people excited, part of the kind of the PR campaign, but getting to scale is going to be a multi-year project.
That's where the operational expertise comes in around logistics, and that's something that we're going to continue to talk about here on Autonomy Markets. And when we were in Austin, we also made another discovery. I know we get a lot of pushback on this, but we were able to verify that the vehicles in Austin are owned by Waymo LLC. Let's roll that video.
Grayson, what's in that Ziploc that's in the right above your head there? Yeah, right there.
Should Sherlock Grayson come out to play?
Check out, see what's in there. What's in that Ziploc?
The insurance liability cards.
Oh, interesting. So, who is listed as the liable party in the insurance card? Who's insured?
Waymo LLC.
So the Waymo. So we've had some debate recently about who owns what and who takes the liability. Oh, Avomo owns it, Uber owns it, but obviously if the insurance is on Waymo, then
This vehicle that we are traveling in on Uber is owned by Waymo LLC.
not Avomo.
Not Avomo, not Uber,
Not Uber.
Waymo.
Waymo. Well, there you have it.
The things you learn when you play detective.
There you have it. Waymo owns the asset. It's there. You saw it in the video. And to the listeners and viewers in the community, thanks for the feedback that you got. But clearly the video shows that Waymo is indeed owning the assets. Is this a trend that's going to continue, Walt?
I mean, just to defend some of our listeners here, they are definitely on the title. That was clearly seen in that video clip. But the question then is like, where does the financial ownership lie? I mean, I'm sure that they've kind of offlaid that to someone else. And if you speculate, if you look at the Uber relationship, is Uber effectively financing it and paying for that car based on, how those deals are structured, which no one knows. No one knows how those deals are structured, but it's clear that could be a major incentive for why Waymo would partner with Uber in a market if they're effectively helping to finance that, even if the title ownership, in fact, just stays with Waymo. And then ultimately, as we've said many times before, that we think that there will be a market that will develop for this with third parties, whether it's the service and fleet owners or more likely private equity as the return on these goes up. Now, here's the issue. What happens when the price of that car goes down and Waymo doesn't need to finance it as much? Like in one way, that makes it more attractive for Uber to be that partner because it's a lower cost. But in another way, it reduces maybe the value that Uber brings to the table with Waymo. Because, obviously everyone thinks that, Uber brings this demand. I'm a little skeptical in the long term whether that has value. There's obviously the financial relationship, which is, tied into the demand, I think, somewhat. And then there's also just kind of this service functionality, which, Uber has elected to outsource in many cases. They own minority stakes, but this is not them providing these service locations. These are partners that they have.
It's a slippery slope here. At the end of the day, who really needs who?
We'll see. It's an exciting market. Obviously, Uber is going to do what they do. As Dara has talked about, these are short-term relationships. If I were them, maybe I'd do longer-term relationships with Waymo. If I was Uber, maybe I would, take ownership of some of these, real estate locations, these places where they have power, where they have service, because then you are maintaining some additional value to Waymo over the longer term. So there's certain things I might do differently. And look, Uber's obviously willing to throw around cash. We'll talk later about, their latest investment in technology, which in this case was with Nuro. But I don't know. There's many different paths that this can take. So we'll continue to watch and look for the tea leaves. I will say this though, like initial deals aren't necessarily, determinant of what's going to happen in the future. Meaning that like if Uber and Waymo announce a market together, that's positive for sure for Uber, but that doesn't necessarily mean that at some point Waymo doesn't find a way to not use Uber. And conversely, it also doesn't mean that Uber is screwed because like Uber might ultimately be the buyer of that Waymo network of cars. Because if Waymo ultimately just wants to license to privately owned cars, then they might want to offload that network to somewhere else. And then the third leg of this, Grayson, I know is some people are concerned like, well, what if Waymo licenses the technology to all these OEMs and require it to be on the Waymo One network? Let me be very clear about this. under any administration, I just don't think that would fly, because they would then be using their monopoly dollars from Google search to again drive a, what could be a monopoly business in autonomy. So I highly doubt that Waymo can do that fourth path, which might be, the worst for Uber. So that's, theoretically a positive in that case for Uber.
We weren't just in Austin visiting depots, riding in Tesla Robotaxi, riding in Waymos. We were there to explore and to learn new technology. A company that we met with, Avride. We went for a ride, completely drive route around Austin, and let's roll the video of that ride as we discuss it.
Before we talk about Avride, let's just say outright, as you're seeing now, we are in a car without a driver in it. And by the way, for Tesla, I think do what Avride does and take off the headrest so we can get a better sense of what's going out the front of the window. They have the attendant in the passenger seat, which apparently that they've done for a while. What was your impression of the ride itself? The first time, I assume, for you in an Avride, or no?
First time in an Avride, I found it very smooth, and I found the IONIQ 5 a very comfortable vehicle as well.
Definitely IONIQ 5, and I think we need to spend more time on this in future. The OEMs that are, kind of at the forefront in partnering, because as our listeners know, Hyundai with the IONIQ 5 is also partnering with Waymo with an integrated vehicle. At least that's what they showed at CES. We'll see what the final product looked like. But yeah, I think overall a comfortable ride. Now, I think, as I'll say later, we don't know if we were on certain track that was highly optimized or things like that. Both of us have done many autonomy rides now. So until we get to the point where we can pick locations, you won't know for sure in all different scenarios. Like we had a similar thing with May Mobility that I thought was a pretty good ride in their demo. But I think overall, certainly I was shocked that there was yet another company out there that was seemingly this far along in the development of autonomy.
The vehicle performed at an extremely high level. The technology is getting there, and you and I were able to, no pun intended, go under the hood. We were able to see how they're building it. We got a complete walkthrough of how they're working with Hyundai to build it. Interesting fact that we learned, Walt, these vehicles are going to be built at the Meta plant just outside Savannah, Georgia. That is the same plant that Hyundai has that's building the Waymo vehicles. That's a very interesting plant for us to watch in the future.
It was also great to see kind of it all kind of undone, where the electronics go, where the compute goes, how the integration actually works with a company like Hyundai, as opposed to like a May Mobility where they have this relationship with Toyota, but a lot of that compute is in the passenger seat, right? In this case, you can ride in the passenger seat because it's a AV, right? So there's just a lot more room in the front. But we see how they pack all of the different sensors and compute throughout the car. So it was, our thanks go out to Avride to kind of pull back the curtain and show us how this all kind of comes together.
And you're right. And thank you to the Avride team. They were fully transparent with us, which was eye-opening, and very, very thankful for that. One of the neatest things I took away from the compute, Walt, when they opened the hood of the trunk, all the compute was in there. That was interesting how they're optimizing the space of the vehicle. And then in the trunk, it's obviously hidden as well. And I said, oh, well, you passed the golf club test. I could put golf clubs in there. They did a lot of things really, really right from an engineering perspective. A really great engineering team.
I mean, just to be clear, it wasn't in the trunk. It was in like the sub trunk, where I think most people would think the spare tire should go. So to your point, there was plenty of room in the trunk for additional baggage. But, we've talked about the ride. Some of our listeners might be like, who the hell is Avride? So can you give us a little history about this company and what you know about them and what we learned on this trip?
So Avride was originally part of Yandex. Yandex is the Russian version of Google. They had a search engine before Russia's war with Ukraine. The company was spun out and is now controlled by a company called Nebius Group, which is an AI infrastructure holding company based in Amsterdam. Avride is a subsidiary of that with their headquarters in Austin. So it is if you want to say, it's a U.S. company now.
So Nebius is it wasn't like a separate company. It might have been a shell. Actually, I don't even know. But it is the assets there were all Yandex assets. So you just had some assets that stayed in Russia and others that were effectively dropped into this Nebius group. And I think, hopefully people know them because they already have a partnership with Uber. And I think what we learned on this trip was that the first AVs are going to be entering Uber's network later this year in Dallas, again, with these Hyundai IONIQ 5. So, I mean, is it possible that AV Ride gets Hyundais on the road before Waymo does, Grayson?
Yes, it's going to happen. Yes, and we will be there in Dallas later this year to ride in the AV Ride vehicles there. Yes, AV Ride will have the IONIQ 5s in commercial service on the Uber network before Waymo has the IONIQ 5s in commercial service on the Waymo network or perhaps the Uber network. So yes, they will.
So it's another example of another company that Uber is partnering with to continue to try and fragment this market and place additional bets like they did with Nuro, which we'll get to next. So there's not this reliance on Waymo or in this risk that clearly Tesla creates, through their progress with their own rideshare business. So, that's pretty exciting. And like I said, we've been in it. We felt it. It feels good. And we can't wait to get back in and actually pay and maybe not have that attendant that's in there today with AV Ride.
I would say to the listeners and viewers, keep your eye on AV Ride, because what we experienced, the tech is real, the engineering chops are there, and they're going to really grow that business. It's not just the robotaxi business that they're building. They're also building a sidewalk delivery business that we experienced in Austin. We're going to talk about it. Let's roll the video as we talk about it. These bots were impressive. We got to see how they're manufactured. We get to see how they're built. We got to see them in person. And it's not just 3 or 4 bots. At The Ohio State, when class is in, they're delivering 1,200 deliveries a day. That's impressive. And so what happens with us? Well, we got to ask questions. Do you deliver in the rain? Yes. Do you deliver in the snow? Yes, no problem. What did you think when you saw those bots out there in Austin in 107-degree heat? I'll add.
And by the way, can you make 2 deliveries? Also, yes, it's been designed for that. And yeah, the construction of it, I think I was very impressed. It was very thoughtful. It was a lot lower cost than I expected it to be, given that it is truly autonomous, right? Someone is just not driving this thing. To your point, the Ohio State implementation is scale. You can see that the video you're watching now, it traverses quite well. And by the way, hats off to you, because you've been all over this space on Road to Autonomy, having the CEO of Serve, having the CEO of Coco. This is a very interesting market in terms of, again, lowering cost on deliveries for food. And I think these, by the way, in terms of Instacart, this is not just Uber Eats. Instacart, pay attention, because these bots are definitely big enough to deliver groceries that can get you to your average grocery side of $120 that you're looking for.
And they're reliable at the end of the day. And this market, and you're right, it is scaling. There's partnerships with AV Ride has with Uber Eats. They also have partnerships with Grubhub. And in Japan with Rakuten, they have a partnership there. It's a very growing business for them. They're in Austin, Dallas, Jersey City, Tokyo, and the Ohio State. So the market is continuing to grow. And I got to say, it performed very, very well, crossing the road, fully autonomous. And I'll never forget it when the Uber Eats delivery went to the gentleman. Oh, my lunch is here. He was happy to see his robots.
I bet he was. Yeah, it was great. And maybe you need to have a sub podcast now. Rather than the road to autonomy, it's the sidewalk to autonomy.
You never know. Keep tuning into the road to autonomy, because we will continue to cover the sidewalk bots. Walt, there's never a sleepy week in autonomy. We can't pull a Rip Van Winkle, go to sleep, wake up, and wow, they're everywhere. Big news this week. Nuro got their first licensing deal. Congratulations, Team Nuro, on that. Not only did they get a licensing deal, they're going to deploy on the Uber network. The licensing deal, this one, I was like, wow, where'd this come from? Lucid. Nuro cut a licensing deal with Lucid, and they're going to run exclusively on a 6-year period on the Uber network for the Lucid Gravity vehicle. What do you think of this deal?
First of all, I mean, we've talked about this over the course of these episodes on Autonomy Markets, and I'm sure with you having interviewed management from Nuro, and both of us having visited the company and spent time with them, so we're certainly not surprised that they're able to get these OEM relationships. We talked about the positive pivot that they made, kind of away from purpose-driven vehicles. They were kind of in this market that we just talked about, that AV Ride on the food delivery side of things, and move towards this licensing deal with OEMs. And when you have this much of a vote of confidence from Uber primarily, and with Lucid, that's clearly a positive. I think, we had hoped for a larger OEM, or like a Ford or something like that to show up. You can't you can bring the horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. And I think it's the OEMs make these decisions at their own peril, because if Lucid and Nuro and Uber are successful in 2026, and these guys are going to be driver out in 2026 with Uber, Nuro can only, deal with a certain number of OEMs at a time. Wave, same issue, certain number of OEMs at a time. I know from an investor standpoint, you're like, oh yeah, we're going to do 10 different OEM deals. I get it, but like, it takes a lot of integration and a lot of time. There will be a select few that partner early enough that as this business scales, that it'll be important to have those relationships for the OEM. So congrats to Lucid for having the forethought to lock this down, and now some additional money, I think, to get it done.
And there's a common denominator here, Walt. On the Lucid side, and the Uber side, the PIF, the Saudi investment fund. They're both in Lucid, they're both in Uber. Perhaps maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. I'm purely speculating on there, but they're both large shareholders in both companies. The thing that we thought about, and we talked about this last week, Lucid is a luxury product. It is a beautifully vehicle. It is incredibly well engineered. Could this perhaps go on the Uber Comfort tier or higher tiers of Uber just because of the quality of the Lucid product?
I mean, sure, but as we've talked about before, we think all autonomy cars need to be on the Comfort tier and higher. And the counter argument to this is a lovely car is, because that's kind of a euphemism for it, it's also an expensive car. So when you think about rideshare as utility, you're talking about a car that effectively lists for $80,000 as opposed to, the Hyundai that Waymo is going to be using going forward, I think to a certain extent, as well as AV Ride. It's like 40, 45,000. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like these early car things are more about proving out models. And I think what Nuro would also argue is that their sensor stack is going to be dramatically lower than the types of numbers that we've seen out of Waymo. And you can see it physically based on the type of sensors that they have and how many that they have. By the way, Waymo, I think, is on the way to reducing sensors. As you see more and more of their cars hit the road, when that Hyundai hits the road, in my view, that will have fewer sensors than are on the Jaguar today. And with integration and built into the production line, it drives those costs down. But, you can't go without saying that it is an expensive car in order to partner with right out of the gate.
The sensor aspect, yes, the sensors are going to get smaller, to get less complex, because on the backside, the maintenance to fix and repair complex sensors is very expensive. And I want to dial into a little bit here on the Lucid Nuro thing, because in the SEC filing titled Vehicle Production Agreement, it clearly states that the Lucid is going to integrate on the factory line the Nuro hardware. That's fascinating. These vehicles are coming off the factory line fully integrated. That's really, really impressive. This is not a aftermarket. This is a full-blown factory-built Lucid Nuro vehicle.
That's great. And like I said, not only is it a lighter stack, but to integrate it into the production line, obviously it enables them to drive out additional costs and hopefully reduce maintenance. I think that's a very important point that you brought up, Grayson. You have to think of cost in terms of total cost of ownership. You can have a less expensive car, but if it's always in the shop getting tuned up, then maybe it's not as expensive. In this case, maybe it's the opposite, right? Waymo is a very expensive car with a very expensive and lots of sensors, and they need 80,000 square feet, to basically continue to tune up these sensors and fix them. At the end of the day, 5-10 years from now, or 10 years from now, when autonomous cars represent, in our view, more than a third of overall vehicles being manufactured in the US or purchased in the US, these sensors, there's going to be fewer sensors. They're going to build greater reliability, and getting it built in on the line, like Nuro's doing right out of the gate with Lucid, that's the way to get it done.
It's the way to get it done. To our friends at Lucid that listen, Walt and I would love to come do a plant tour and perhaps do a podcast live at the Lucid plant in Arizona, seeing this come to fruition, because it's something truly special what you've built here. Well, you call me Detective Sherlock Grayson, so I'm you know me, I'm constantly reading the tea leaves. And in the official press release from Uber announcing this deal, I noticed the line, and I'm going to read this line to you here, word for word. In quote, Uber aims to deploy 20,000 or more Lucid vehicles equipped with the Nuro driver over 6 years. The vehicles will be owned and operated by Uber or its third-party fleet partners and made available to riders exclusively via the Uber platform. Well, a lot of people must be listening to Autonomy Markets because you called it, sir. You were correct. Uber is going to own assets.
I mean, I don't think enough people listen to Autonomy Markets because I constantly get pushback of like, oh, no. Uber's not going to own, going to own the cars. And again, long term, that may be the case, or maybe it won't. Again, if you're an Uber investor, are you really going to be upset if 3 or 4 years from now, after Waymo builds up this fabulous fleet, that Uber would take ownership of it and then, come in with some financial partnership? Is that really a negative? Because I would think that that's probably, in many ways a positive, based on where the technology might be. And by the way, I don't think this is going to be the last of it. I think, Wave has already been announced as a partner with Uber in, the UK and whatever markets that they're going to launch. They didn't put it in the press release, but I suspect that as you see more details there, Uber will own cars that have a Wave driver in it with whatever OEM partners that they have. Same thing with May Mobility. This is the playbook. So if you're an investor, get prepared for Uber to use its balance sheet. And by the way, they should, because this is the most important thing for them over the next 10 years. The vast majority of miles driven on a rideshare network are going to be autonomous in 10 years. So you have to make sure that, you have a play in whoever ends up winning or losing. I also, by the way, we've got some feedback. Oh, you guys aren't engineers, whatever. Like, yeah, I'm not engineers, but I've talked to the best engineers and we're trying to evaluate this technology. And you know what the best engineers tell us? Go out and get in the cars and try it. That is the best thing you do. We're not going to sit there and look at code and evaluate AI. And I challenge anyone that claims that they think that they can. Get in the cars, talk to the engineers, talk to the manufacturers, and talk to the partners like Uber to try and get a sense of who's going to win. Even then, you're not assured just where someone is today that company will be the winner or loser 5 years or 5 or 10 years from now. That's why we got to get out in the market, get in these cars. We were in a Tesla last week, and we were in the AV ride, and we'll continue to get in more and more of these cars as they continue to progress.
We're going to get out there and we're going to do the field work. And I emphasize what Walt said. We're not engineers. Me personally, I'm a connect the dot person. If you want to call me connect the dot engineer, connect the dots, because we're out there constantly learning, because you have to talk to multiple people to get different opinions. And Walt and I are going to continue to dive into all aspects of autonomy, not just the vehicle, but the infrastructure that supports it, the financing elements that finance this. So I agree with you. Uber's going to own it on their balance sheet. How much do you see them potentially offloading this to Move's balance sheet, which Bloomberg is reporting that they're raising $1.2 billion for the Waymo fleet in Miami? Is that going to be a thing where we'll see Uber increase their stake in Move, or perhaps fund some debt into them? And then some of these vehicles, perhaps the Lucid vehicles, will be owned on Move's balance sheet?
I mean, how many cars can you really buy for $1 billion if you also need funds for operations? I mean, again, I don't know how that market is going to evolve. I have good ideas. And I think as the price of the total cost of ownership, meaning the car cost as well as the sensor stack and as well as the maintenance, the ongoing maintenance of these things exists, there's going to be a business model. When you look at what humans and the associated insurance with humans represent, there is a business model for someone to make money on the asset as well as the service, the technology in the platform. And it's not going to take from some of the numbers we've already seen that are on the roadmap from a lot of these companies at a number that's well below where Waymo is today. But again, like, just because Waymo's at a certain number today doesn't mean they can't get there in a couple of years. So the money will flow there, Grayson. I'm not sure who's it going to be. What I'm curious about, though, Grayson, is Uber's decision to not outright own the logistics and power. I mean, we talked about, I think in an earlier segment, about the challenges of getting power and depots. If Uber relies on third parties that it owns minority stakes in, like, isn't there a tremendous value associated with that part of this ecosystem?
There is, and I can't stop thinking about this ever since our trip. Is why doesn't Uber form a division called Uber Logistics that manages the real estate, manages the operations, secures the energy contracts, does all the service. Why don't they build that up? Because to me, if you're going to outsource this to partners, those partners could turn their back on you one day and say, biddity boppity boop, bye bye. Why not bring it in house? And as we learned, and we met with my friend Dean Foreman, the chief economist for Texas Oil and Gas, we learned that the energy demands for these vehicles are astronomical, and they certain times they're having challenges getting the energy. So why not bring that all in house and secure these contracts?
First of all, I'm happy that we got our first beepity bobbity boop in this week's podcast from Grayson. I always look forward to those. The answer, Grayson, is a logistics business is considered low margin. But stop the tape, because guess what? A rideshare business is a low margin business. Like when you think of what a customer pays versus what hits the margin at the end, that's already a low margin business. But I know it doesn't seem sexy and glamorous to be in this logistics business. And the reason to do it is potentially that strategic value that you have in the relationship with Waymo, or however you can always sell it in the future. And look, maybe a lot of these minority contracts that they have give them a right of first refusal to own these things. We don't know. We don't see these contracts. So it's possible that they've protected themselves, but it's increasingly clear to us that is going to be a very important part of the ecosystem.
It's going to be a very important part of the ecosystem. Yeah, it could be small margin, but you have a publicly traded salvage company that's a $50 billion market cap, and that has very small margins. So it could be there. And then Uber could tell the market, well, Lyft has FlexDrive. This Uber Logistics is our version of FlexDrive, essentially, but with more bells and whistles.
I don't think Uber needs to respond to Lyft's FlexDrive. Uber's the dominant player in the market. Lyft's around the hoop. In the U.S., maybe.
Lyft has challenges. Well, Lyft has challenges. Uber's continuing to grow. And Tesla, as when we came back, they put up let's call it a drawing, is what I'll say. And yes, it is true that it looks like a certain type of object, which we are a children's program here, so I will not describe it in depth. They expanded the Austin ODD to 42 square miles. To me, that's a sign of confidence that Tesla is going all in to scale robotaxi, and they're comfortable where the current state of the technology is. What do you think?
I think we'd love to pat our backs here on on the autonomy market. So we kind of knew this was happening. Obviously, while we were in Austin, we thought this was going to happen, and Elon actually tweeted that's going to happen. So it's good to see that it actually followed through. For those of you who said that Elon says stuff that doesn't happen, here's a case where it actually did happen. This is clearly going to generate some more videos, and I've already seen the super positive people posting how great it is, and then those looking at it with a fine tooth comb being like, oh my God, how can you allow this car to be on this road when this little blurb happened, even though there's, plenty of similar things with Waymo today, not 5 years ago, today, that you could make the similar challenges from. So it's good fun. I don't think it requires us to run back to Austin quite so soon, Grayson, at least not yet, but congrats to the team. And just to be clear, we had zero issues. I said this last week. We had zero issues with our car. And I know what an issue is. Meaning, like, I know when there's a sudden hesitation, as most people who own a Tesla can attest to, or have been in a Tesla with FSD as it is. There was none of that. There's been subsequent questions since this launch about whether Tesla has added sensors to the car. Someone kind of asked us about that before we went, and we carefully looked over that car up and down and all around. I could not see one additional sensor in the car. We were in the car, right? We were actually in the car looking around. We went outside the car before we actually got in and was looking below. I didn't see anything. Does that mean I couldn't have missed something? Sure, I could have possibly missed something, but like to allege that there's additional sensors in there that an existing Y just can't be flipped on and added to this network, I guess we'll soon find out, as they expand further in Austin.
You're right. We walked around. We didn't see any additional sensors. It looked just like a new Model Y. And this week, you took possession of a new Model Y. How does it feel to have the new Model Y in your possession?
First of all, it's great. It's, as I said before, the suspension is so much better than the existing Y. It wasn't autonomously delivered to my home from the dealer. And in fact, I wanted to actually do the press the button and drive me home, but it wasn't. I think it only had like single digit miles on the car, maybe 12. So it hadn't been calibrated. So it said it wouldn't do my full self-driving until it was calibrated. So this gets back to what we were saying before about it doesn't need some fancy calibration. They're literally sending these Teslas uncalibrated. And By the time I got home, the cameras had been calibrated to do a full self-driving. So it was a great experience. Grayson, it still does not go up my driveway, even with the newest software. So hopefully, I'm looking forward to the episode I can come back on here and report that, yes, the Tesla drove me all the way up my driveway as opposed to just to the front of my driveway.
That'll be the funny episode. Walt's Tesla driveway. Now, will you put a big T on your driveway when it does that?
I don't have a circle thing, but this just kind of reminds me of last week with the hotel where it kept dropping us off on the sidewalk or like a block away. And then by the end of the trip there, it took us into the little circle. Take me into the little circle in my hotel or my house in this case.
Tesla, Walt needs to get up his driveway. And I have a sneaking suspicion based on the way that FSD is advancing that it's just a matter of time before it goes up your driveway. And then hopefully that's next week or the week after. Unsure, but I'm very confident to say that it's going to happen at some point. For next week, what do we need to look for in the autonomy markets? Because boy, oh boy, we had a very big week this week. What do we need to look for next week?
I mean, the last 2 weeks have been exhausting between our time in Austin and then everything that went on this week. And then next week, it really gets even worse for me. Earnings season for the analyst. And in this case, put my telco hat back on, Grayson. I got a lot of telco earnings in terms of our world and the world of autonomy markets. We do have Mobileye reporting on Thursday, so we'll see what they have to say. But I'm not worried that this industry and its ecosystem won't generate some more headlines for us to comment on next week.
You know, it's just a tweet away. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is partnerships. Walt, until next week.